And welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show, ladies and gentlemen. And I'm very happy to say that joining us once again on the big show is Walter E. Williams, distinguished economist at George Mason University, syndicated columnist. And Walter, Happy New Year.
Well, same to you. Happy New Year.
I want to read for the folks part of your column, Parting Company. I want to go to the very end, and then we could certainly discuss it. Americans have several options. We could, like sheep, submit to those who have contempt for liberty and our Constitution. We can resist, fight, and risk bloodshed and death in an attempt to force America's tyrants to respect our liberties and Constitution. A superior alternative is to find a way to peaceably separate into states whose citizens respect liberty and the Constitution. My personal preference, you write, is a restoration of the constitutional values of limited government that made us a great nation. What you're talking about is the main thrust of your piece, talking about how we really have become a divided nation and divided on grounds so important that it doesn't appear that there could really be any kind of reconciliation, much as many marriages. And you talk about going separate ways.
Oh, yes. Well, yes, I do. I think that I think it's clear that we have strayed very, very far from the Constitution. That is, the founders gave us a Constitution where the federal government's role in our lives was limited. And matter of fact, I give a quotation from James Madison, the acknowledged father of the Constitution, and he said, and I'm just going to read the two sentences.
Sure.
He said, and it's in Federalist Paper 45, he said that the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined. The powers that will be left to the state and local governments are numerous and indefinite. And he said that the powers of the federal government that were delegated to the federal government will be exercised principally on external objects such as war, peace, negotiation, and foreign commerce. Does that sound like what we have today?
That sounds the furthest thing from it.
That is absolutely right. That is, the federal government is in every single aspect of our lives. And it seems like, and without any constitutional amendments, and it seems like there's no turning back. That is, Americans most Americans, I would feel, want to have the power to use the federal government to live at the expense of another American. That is, they want their congressmen, and see, I blame the people, not politicians. They want their congressmen, they elect their congressmen to office to use the power of their office to take the rightful property of one American and bring it back to them. Whether you're talking about farm subsidies, business bailouts, food stamps, welfare, and thousands of federal programs, the only way the federal government can give one American citizen $1 is to first, through intimidation, threats, and coercion, confiscate that dollar from some other American. That's not authorized by the United States Constitution.
No, and you know, yeah, and talking about Article 1, Section 8, we could talk about many other things that are going on in today's United States of America that are just as egregious. And so let me ask you this. You say that your personal preference is a restoration of the constitutional values of limited government that made us a great nation. That would imply acquiescing, or that the progressives or liberals or whatever you want to call them acquiesce and say, okay, you know what, Walter E. Williams is correct. He has a better way. Our founding fathers were correct. They have the better way. We've really gone way out of whack. We're too far. That's never going to happen.
That's whistling Dixie.
Yeah. So talk about. I mean, I think you're serious, and it's a very interesting point. Talk about the separation. If is that possible? Is that feasible? Is that
well? I don't know. Now there's one group of young Americans, and they call themselves, and you can check it out on the web. It's called freestateproject.org. And what they're proposing is to try to get 20,000 or 30,000 Americans to move to the state of New Hampshire. New Hampshire is not a highly populated state, so if 20 or 30,000 Americans move there, they'll have a lot of political power to peaceably take over the legislature of New Hampshire and the governorship and elect our own senators and congressmen to Washington, and then tell the United States Congress, look, obey the United States Constitution, or we're going to secede from the Union. We're just going to become a separate nation. Now, one of the questions is, the second time that was tried, it led to a very, very bloody conflict where people sought independence, namely the war between the states in 1861. And matter of fact, and I said the second time, it was because the first time was very successful in 1776 when we sought independence.
Right.
That was successful. But I don't know whether Americans would tolerate this time the federal government using troops to come in and murder fellow Americans.
No, I certainly. Is there a peaceful way to do this, though?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Now, and I think that one of the big problems, I think it lies in educating the American people. Maybe we need to try more towards educating, because we have to educate the American people that the founders of our nation had a deep and abiding distrust for the United States Congress.
Yeah.
Too many Americans put too much faith in Congress. You know, just look at the Bill of Rights. Look at the language of the Bill of Rights. It says, Congress shall not abridge. Congress shall not infringe. Congress shall not prohibit. Congress shall not disparage. Now, if the founding fathers thought that Congress would not do this, why in the world would they put that kind of language?
Right. It was protective, absolutely.
That's right, because they did not trust Congress. Matter of fact, I've suggested to people that when we die and at our next destination we see anything like the Bill of Rights, we know that we're in hell. A Bill of Rights would be in heaven would be an insult to God.
That's very.
You can't trust God.
That is very profound. We're talking to Walter E. Williams, distinguished economist at George Mason University and syndicated columnist and author here on the Steve Malzberg Show. So what do you see ahead, Walter, for 2014? I don't think you're going to see anything, any of the options that you put forth. So what do you see ahead in 2014? I guess, you know, they're making an issue out of this. If you heard de Blasio's inaugural yesterday, oh my God, it seemed like a Marxist love fest. So you got they're going to make an issue out of this unemployment benefit extension. They're going to make an issue out of wages, minimum wage. Is that going to be enough to counteract the Obamacare fiasco as we head into the 2014?
Well, see, I think one of the things that we have to keep in mind that we've been losing our liberties, whether there's been a Democratic administration, Democrat control over Washington, D.C., or whether there's Republican control of Washington, D.C. See, the big problem is not congressmen. That is because congressmen are doing precisely what the American people elect them to office to do, and that is, as I said earlier, take the property of one American and bring it back to them. So our big task, and I don't know whether it's possible at all, our big task is to try to sell our fellow Americans on the moral superiority of liberty and its main ingredient, limited government. And that is the challenging task, not changing politicians.
Yeah, no.
We had George Bush, a Republican president, and a Republican Senate, and a Republican Congress, and House of Representatives, and spending during his administration went up just as much as during the Johnson administration.
Yeah.
And just as much control over, like getting rid of incandescent bulbs, doing this and doing that and all that kind of stuff that happened under Republicans. So if you're hoping for Republicans to change things, you're whistling Dixie again.
Yeah, it's not a pretty picture, but you're a great painter of whatever the picture is, Walter, and it's a pleasure to talk to you, sir.
And thanks for talking to you, Steve, and once again, Happy New Year.
Thank you. Look forward to speaking again. Walter Williams, ladies and gentlemen, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. Fascinating conversation, fascinating piece, and he's a fascinating man. I want to talk, I touched on this at the top of the show, and I just want to, Bob Grant, the pioneer of talk radio, who was so much more than get off my phone, but that was a great part of him. He was so much more than, why don't you meet me down at 57th and 7th and I'll punch your nose right down your throat, you creep. but it was such a great part of him. He was the pioneer of talk radio, conservative talk radio as we know it. I grew up listening to him. I mean, as a teenager, locked in my room, listening to Bob Grant, not because it was, forbidden, but I didn't want to be bothered. And I'd listen to talk radio, along with Barry Farber and others, but Bob Grant, there was something about him. And I always wanted to be like him. And he was one of my great influences in getting into talk radio, and it was a dream come true. My first full-time job at WMCA Radio. In 1980, I was a kid still going to Brooklyn College. I had finished an internship at WMCA. I was producing Bob Grant's radio show. He had just come back to do mornings at WMCA in 1980. The show was AM 57. And truth be told, he hated doing it. He had a co-host. He considered himself the highest paid time checker and weather giver in the country. And I could tell stories, but I don't want to tell too many stories out of school. He had the best sense of humor. He was a caring individual, and he, at times, when he put on that persona on the air, there was nobody like him on the air. And then off the air, he was usually completely different. But I got the education of a lifetime. Not only the thrill of a lifetime, but the education of a lifetime working with Bob Grant. And then we were together at WABC over the years, and I, in effect, I did afternoon drive at WOR from 2007 to 2011, and I replaced the show at OR that replaced him. So I consider myself the conservative who followed Bob Grant, because the team they put on were basically two liberals that followed him. That didn't work out so well, so I followed them and had the honor of sitting in Bob Grant's chair in that afternoon drive slot for so many years. So to his wonderful, wonderful, wonderful wife, Josephine, and to his millions and millions of fans, sympathy and condolences go out to the great, great Bob Grant. May he rest in peace. Steve Malzberg Show.
The Steve Malzberg Show.